Hello and welcome to the Practitioner podcast. This is a podcast from us at Renaissance. We're a network of missional practitioners and microchurches in the greater Boston area. Every episode we talk about themes around living on mission and living in microchurch community, and we're hoping that our conversations always touch on the practical realities of everyday ordinary people, because our mission is about cultivating beautiful kingdom people embedded in the everyday stuff of life. My name's Christine and I'm here with the one and only
Drew Thurman.
Hello, hello. And we also want to welcome everybody to a special Advent episode. I think, to us, this season is super special. And so the feel of this episode is just going to be a little bit different. But we're recording this on Monday, December 22nd. So just a few days before Christmas. And we wanted to capture these last few days leading up to Christmas Day. And just spend some time talking about why this season matters, not just to us, but we think to what it looks like to live on mission every day. So, Drew, I know that I hit you with a shower thought, 22 days ago, and you were very gracious and willing to do this with me. But on, November 29th, I was like, I think we should try to write every single day of Advent. And you had the idea of writing according to the themes of each week, which are hope, peace, joy, and love. And so I thought it would be good for us to just start with talking about what that's been like for each of us. And then we can kind of get into, we'll widen the view of Advent and missional practitionership. But I'm wondering, has this been a chore? Has this been hard? What's it been like?
Well, I'd be lying if there's not been a few days where I'm like, oh my goodness, it's 8:30 and I've had such an insane day and now I committed to this. But overall, the experience has been wonderful. I think it's forced me, I think we both have talked about how we'd like to write a little bit more, and that it's a discipline that I often, especially with young kids and, a business and all kinds of stuff I'm doing all the time, I don't get to it. But beyond all of that and just the writing side that's turned out to be really meaningful, I love Advent. We're going to talk about this. It's not something I grew up with, and I've really appreciated it the last few years as I've leaned in. But I think this year has been even more meaningful with getting to write and sit. There's just no way, if you're going to write every day for all of the entire Advent season, that there's just a bunch of stuff off the top of your head. So you really have to be reading, you have to be meditating, you have to be pondering. And I think because of that, I've probably experienced this season in a more rich fashion than I ever have before, because of you saying, hey, we should write every day. So thank you. What about you?
No, I think very similarly. I guess since I don't have young kids, 8:30 is not late for me quite yet. But I'm the same, where I'm I feel like I'm always later than you on my post. And I'm sometimes 11:30, I'm I gotta get this in. But yeah, I think it's been, I was thinking a lot about why I've maybe felt prompted by the Spirit to do this. And I do think we often think of spiritual disciplines as prayer and reading scripture, and it is those things, but I think there's something about writing and slowing down your thoughts and, like you said, pondering and just holding your whole, I think writing for me is a process more than just mental fortitude. It's getting my computer out or getting a journal out and really embodying what it looks like to slow down and then encounter God. And yeah, I think from the outset, I just felt like the Lord was inviting me into sinking a little bit deeper into the season than just intellectual thought. And I think with how crazy the headlines have been in the last 30 days, I have felt that tension of Advent of what am I going to write about hope or joy when I just read something really awful on the news that I don't want to write something trite, oh, well, this is a nice theme. And I think that's what it's it's made me so much more aware of God and just what this season is all about, which is God meeting us in the darkness, God meeting us in the unknown and the waiting. And I think that's been really important for me of just realizing how often I kind of maybe just glaze by stuff, or not just like don't think about the things of God, but I don't really think about the pain in the world because I don't slow down enough. You know, I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
one thing, it's important to slow down and think about God and encounter him. But I think part of this discipline for me has been realizing like one of the ways that I can encounter God is by really trying to encounter my neighbor in being concerned for the sorrows of the world. And that's been really stark to me
yeah,
these past couple weeks.
yeah. Well, it's funny hearing you say that because, yes, I have felt that tension as well. And uh, trying to process how do you talk about these themes and being real to our reality. But also, like, with that, like, I think there's another level, and I think we're going to talk. I mean, this actually kind of leads us into this episode a little bit, but I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm like super Christian-y on all my social media stuff. Like, I'm not like
Hmm.
posting church stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So, and I have a pretty, because of just my life, I have a pretty diverse group of people who follow me.
Hmm.
And so, like, it's been really interesting. I think some of my writing, I've processed the fact that, like, some of them are also going to be reading this.
Hmm.
And does what I'm saying sound like good news or sound like
Yeah.
someone who's truly not just an escapist, but is truly understanding what's happening around us? And because of that, I think there's been some people that I've seen like heart some of the posts that I'm like kind of surprised, like, oh wow,
Hmm.
like I would have never thought you would have liked this. Or just like maybe I'm going to unfriend or unfollow Drew after seeing 25 days worth of, Christian spiritual reflections on Advent. But I think that's been a really interesting moment for me to stop and say, how does Advent become good news for my neighbor?
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think that's in my writing. That's been a really good forced ritual, like not just to think of it through the lens of my own personal spirituality, but
Yes.
also what's going on in the world and what about what's going on with my neighbor.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I mean, like social media is fake, but I do
Yeah,
think like
yeah.
there is something to.
I mean,
I thought about.
I'm not a reality show influencer
Okay,
like you, but
I
I'm
am. So, me and my 500 followers. Um, no, but it's really interesting because what you said that because I feel the same way where I'm like, I don't know. I always think about social media is like such a weird cut of like non-reality, and at the same
yeah.
time, there are people that I personally know on it. And I thought about how I used to constantly post things related to like Christianity or spirituality
Hmm.
until I like moved back to New England and I wasn't like working in a church and I was like, wow, now I'm aware of what everybody else feels like.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think like some of that for me in the last few years has been like it's not like I'm ashamed of the gospel, but it's more just like becoming more aware of like what it looks like to live on mission. It's not just like spouting Christian thought at people, and
yeah,
that's not
yeah,
helpful.
yeah.
And yeah, I think that leads right into what we were talking about. But maybe before we get into the weeds of it, I think it would be really good for us to talk about like, well, one, define what is Advent, in case people are listening and they're like us and maybe didn't grow up with it. So maybe you could start us off and tell us like, what is Advent, and then like, did you grow up with it? What about like the liturgical calendar? Maybe define that for us. And like, then like, why is it significant to you now, or how has it changed in its significance in your life?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, simply put, I mean, Advent is all about, it really means waiting. It's really about waiting in anticipation. And it is a season that starts the church calendar, which I'll talk about in a second. But it's just a chance for us before we rush to, on the liturgical calendar, what's called Christmastide. Before rushing there, you're really placing yourself back in kind of almost the intertestamental period of there were people who sat in God's silence and really sat for hundreds of years waiting for God to deliver on all these promises that we often talk about, prophecies that were spoken about a Messiah, about a deliverer. Now, we obviously know through the Gospels they didn't totally understand what that deliverance was going to look like, that salvation was, how could they have? But in many ways, while we sit on the other side of Christmas from them, a couple thousand years later, we too are waiting. we talk a lot about being in the already but the not yet. God's kingdom has arrived and is slowly becoming reality through Jesus, but it is not going to be fully realized until Jesus returns again. Much like we were talking about, there are injustices in the world, things that bring us grief and lament, things that are not right, and we are promised a new heavens and a new earth. And so we reflect, I think what Advent's trying to do is allow us to reflect on the fact that God has delivered on his promises in the past through Jesus, and we are anticipating and waiting for him to deliver on his promises again. And so it's a season it's a weird juxtaposition of both acknowledging that things aren't the way that we want them to be, and also clinging to these themes based off of the fact that we believe there is evidence that God does what he says he will do. And so that's I think really what Advent's inviting us to do. So much of, really there's a liturgical calendar that is based, it starts now. There is a big chunk of the year is ordinary time, but it's just a chance for the church to rally around some themes that are pivotal to our faith every year and not to skip over those. And so whether it's, Advent or Epiphany or Lent or Easter, and so on and so on. There is these themes that allow us to really sit in Jesus's life, to acknowledge the core tenets of our faith. And it's cool because the church, so much of, there is so much stuff that has been written behind the scenes that allow people, when we think about liturgy, I think it means the work of the people. It allows the way that we worship, the way that we study, what our focus is, to be built around these themes that Christians have been following for hundreds, thousands of years, and now all across the globe. So typically we think of it from more of like a high church tradition. I didn't grow up in this, by the way, so this is all pretty new to me. But that, I think, is the wordiest way I could describe Advent in the liturgical calendar. So hopefully I created clarity there and not just chaos, but I think I did a pretty decent job.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's like, I like how you're describing. It's about like enveloping yourself into something bigger than yourself.
Yes.
And I think there's so much about Advent that is that. I'm like you. I didn't grow up with it. I think I was thinking about this where in the local megachurch I grew up in, I think we did a Christmas series called Advent Conspiracy, maybe when I was in high school, and that was the first time I heard that word.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know what it was. I just kind of thought it was the time leading up to Christmas and still Christmas time, and then it became more important to me, I think, in college when I started learning more about what this season is actually about, and waiting and reading more. And I think I just started going through hard things, and I think that's what started making it significant. I think something about the holidays is this Kate Buller that said this? It's like a revealer, and I think
she calls it the great. Yeah, she calls it the great revealer. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, especially now being a counselor, I see that. It's like a lot of the themes of what my clients want to talk about once we get into the holiday season. It's like all these deep pains usually get unearthed in a new way. You feel it in a fresh way, and a lot of times it feels like the American consumer Christmas time does not have space for that. And unfortunately, a lot of the church's Christmas time doesn't have room for that. We're just happy and bright and joyful, and it's like, yeah, that true. And at the same time, what do I do with? This is my first Christmas without a parent. What do I do with? I don't have the finances to participate in this consumeristic exchange, whatever it is. And I think for me in my 20s, I was just starting to experience a lot of disillusionment with church that I really didn't know what to do with. And it just didn't really fit well with, yay, Jesus is here. But it became so meaningful to start reading and leaning into, it's okay to be sad and not know the answer. Right up into Christmas.
Well, and I think to your point, I think, you see there's a lot of churches now that are trying to do like blue Christmas services. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those
No.
where it's like a lot of times it's more like low evangelical churches that haven't traditionally practiced what we think of as like everything. Any time a church does anything, it's liturgy, but like traditional, like high liturgy is what we typically think of. So they'll have a service where people come and can just grieve what they've lost, and think about the past year, which is really wonderful. But I also think it's interesting, like, whoever came up with that was probably thinking they created something. And it's like, well, no, like there's actually like, the church has been thinking about these themes for hundreds and thousands of years. So there's already rich things to lean into.
Yep.
And so to your point, yeah, I think, and I think this is why I think you're seeing, I think there's a lot of data that's showing that there is a move back towards liturgy. And I think probably so much of what we grew up in was the church responding to like empty liturgy, where people didn't know the significance behind things. So they were going through this calendar, they're going through these rituals, and they, and I have friends that grew up in high liturgy churches who talk about this. Like they stood up, they sat down, they said prayers, but a lot of it was not unpacked for them, and it became empty, hollow ritual, which is not good either. We don't want that. Right. We don't want soulless religion. But at the same time, and so I think out of that, there was this deep, like, how do we be relevant? How do we be cool? How do we not do that? Right. And I think this pendulum swinging back the other direction, where I think we're realizing that there are some problems with just trying to be trendy and relevant all the time. And that sometimes, I think for a lot of us, we feel so disenchanted, and that we want something that feels older than just it was just developed yesterday, and we're not looking for relevance. We're like literally have relevance being shoved down our throat. We want to do something that feels a little bit more timeless, and feels transcendent. Which again, I think that's why you're even seeing people moving back to like, hey, I really love older architecture in church buildings, and all of a sudden you're hearing churches that never practiced the Book of Common Prayer or never were creedal, like they're suddenly like saying the creeds together. And it's just very interesting that there's this move that direction, because I think there's a lot of us that are like, man, there's something really cool to know that I'm uttering a prayer. I don't have to always develop it. I'm able to say something that Christians all across the world are saying and has been said for hundreds of years. And if someone explains to me why I'm doing those things, it's really powerful. And so I think Advent's one of those, like, I've really enjoyed. It feels like you can just keep plumbing the depths of it. And I think there's been a lot of great literature and stuff that's helped me understand the significance of the season. And I think it's been cool. I want to help other people do that as well, that maybe Advent's like, I didn't grow up with this either. This feels really foreign. What are we talking about? I've seen an Advent chocolate calendar, but I don't, what is this? And realize that no, there's actually something very rich here that is maybe more timeless than just a church series that got thought up about a month or two ago by a few church staffers. So
yeah, I think that's really good. Tell us about, in your opinion, what is it that makes Advent missional? I think we've started kind of like spiraling towards it, but
yeah. Well, Advent is leading us to anticipating the incarnation, and the incarnation is really the cornerstone of missional theology. It's really the cornerstone of God's mission to rescue us. He becomes one of us, John 1, verse 14. He took on flesh and bone. And ultimately, that is the beginning point. Now, while we sometimes struggle at Christmas rushing to Easter, obviously we want to get to the payoff of the story. It's the inception of God's rescue mission to us, becoming one of us, so that He could restore us, and ultimately take on the impact of our sin and fallen humanity. And so it is missional in its very nature. And then I think for us, if we celebrate Advent properly, and again, we're getting into the depth of it, to anticipate, to have hope, is to feel that which feels hopeless, is to sit with the darkness, to experience. We light these candles every Sunday. To light a candle is to, and live in the light is to acknowledge the darkness. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of us, we don't allow ourselves to get hopeful or anticipatory. And I think that's what it's doing, is it's trying to stop and say, no, this is the reason I have faith. The reason I'm looking forward to a hope and a future, is because I believe there's something about the present that isn't right, that isn't all that it was meant to be. And I think anyone, regardless of their faith or practicing faith or lack thereof, like they can probably resonate with that. And so I think there's a very missional tone to Advent, that is us having a reckoning and an acknowledgement of the present, and and having hope and a future joy in what is to be, and to revel in the fact that it's great that God obviously loves us so deeply that we didn't have to. It's not about our piety. It's not about us doing anything to get to Him. He came to us and saw us of having such infinite worth and value that He actually took on flesh and bone and became human, acknowledging the fact that we are made in His image and worthy of salvation. I think there's so much there that is so beautiful and rich. And so to me, everything about Advent is super, super mission heavy in its theme. What did you add to that?
Yeah, I think the other thing I'm thinking about is how I have found that the longer I have been intentional in celebrating Advent, the more this has become like less of a reflex. But in the beginning, I noticed how often when reflecting, I wanted resolution. Like, it was just like easy, like when I'm thinking about Advent, but like I'm like, but Christmas. And I think I've just, like this year, it's been easier for me to just sit with, I don't know, this is sad. And life is hard. But I think I've noticed that a lot. And I noticed that in my own life in like silly ways too, of like, a lot of times, sometimes if I'm watching a movie at home and I feel too tense about, I don't know what's going on, I'll just like look it up on Wikipedia and read the end of the story. And I think like, hopefully not everybody is a crazy person like me, but I do think there's something in us that wants resolve. We want like to like get rid of that tension in our lives, but all of us know that when it comes to real life circumstances, there are things you can't just like skip to the end of the story about, or be like, this is better because like now I know. I'll just look it up on Wikipedia and my life is gonna be better in 6 months. You just have to live through it, and it's hard. And I think Advent is a time where it teaches us like, how do you just sit in that darkness and lament and wait for God and believe that He will keep true to His promises, even if it does not feel like that right now. And I also think about the scripture that talks about how Jesus has experienced everything we've gone through, right? And that is the crux of the incarnation, is like God becoming flesh and living among us and living like us. And obviously that's like what Advent looks to. But I even think about the life of Jesus and how He experienced times where it felt like God wasn't there, where He felt disconnected from the Father. And I think there's something really, I don't know, poignant to that if like the Son of God, if God in the Trinity can experience that in some ways when He's in human flesh, like what does that mean? Like then our experience of disconnection from God is normal, hard, but normal. And it's not something that you experience because like you're not a strong enough Christian or you don't have enough faith. It's just like, this is a part of everyday spirituality. Is sometimes you're going to go through seasons where it feels like God is silent. It feels like you don't know what He's doing in your life. It feels like you don't know where you're going with your life. And that it is holy and important to live in that and to just wait. It sucks, but it's important. And I think like that's, to me, like missional in the sense of like I think everybody that I've encountered that doesn't know Jesus experiences that tension in some ways of looking for answers that they can't find. I don't have for them either, you know? But it's like, obviously my belief is that like God will make that right one day if you put your trust in Him. And And like I want that for them, and I want that for me.
Mm.
And it's like, how do I tell that story with my life to my friends that don't know the Lord? And I think,
Mm.
like, to me, there's something really grounding of I don't need to skip over to the resolution in
Yeah,
my own
yeah,
life or to my friends' lives, like where I could just be like, let me give you the spiel about how God's gonna make this all good. If like it's
yeah,
not the prosperity gospel, it's just like there's something about God is willing to sit with us in this mess,
yeah,
and we don't have answers, and that's a part of it too.
yeah. Well, I think what you're saying, again, I think this is, why whatever the liturgical calendar, I mean, there's parts of it that trace back, I think, as early as like the fourth century. I mean, I think there's something powerful about the fact that it's designed in a fashion that we don't get to Christmas until we first experienced Advent, and we don't get to Easter until we have Lent. We don't
Hmm.
get to Pentecost and Easter until we have Lent, and both of those seasons are designed to experience what you're talking about, to acknowledge reality, both of our world and Lent a lot of times with our own sin and our own
Hmm.
need for and kind of preparing ourselves for Easter, and so yeah, I think we have done a really lousy job. I think sometimes in some of our faith communities, I can take full responsibility of this. I worked in some of these spaces, and I probably was perpetuating some of this. That how do we be happy? How do we be joyful? How do we celebrate? How do we have good times? And the reality is that faith is more fraught than that. And I
Hmm.
think anybody who grows up in faith realizes that you have there's a juxtaposition there. You have to be able to hold up multiple things at the same time.
Hmm.
Faith to me is always you know this and that. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
And I think so many times, like that's always the journey now that I want people on. They want certainty, they want propositions. What happens when we can acknowledge, like, I can sit with the things are not the way that they should be, and also I believe that there's still a God at work who will do
Yeah.
something about it. And so I think what you're describing, I think if we get it right, like that's what Advent does for us, is allows us to sit and hold up multiple things at the same time,
Yeah.
whereas many of us only got to hold up one of those.
Hmm.
And on the flip side, I don't think there's any good thing about just holding up lament with no resolution. I think that leads us to, being, really fatalistic if we're not
Hmm.
careful. And so I think it is that, and I think that's what's been interesting about writing these prompts. Even is just being able to hold the tension of those two things all the time.
Hmm.
And really, if you grow up in faith, that's true of any number of things. How many, on so many issues, how do I hold up multiple truths at the same time,
Yeah.
and live in the tension of that? And Advent is living into the tension, in so many beautiful ways. So I think what you're saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us too, like in your mind, why should a missional movement like Renaissance make such a big deal of Advent? Like, what's the value in a network doing that?
One, I just I think I've seen this across our network. I know it's true for me. I do think that there has been, and since we've started a move to being a little bit more liturgical in some ways, and
Hmm.
finding, whether it's in a living room or a third place, like finding some ways to still lean into the historical Christianity, the great tradition, so to speak. And I think that might be fascinating to some people who just imagine us just sitting in a living room shooting the breeze and just, you know,
Hmm.
calling ourselves the church and being done. Like there's actually a lot of thought that goes into it. I know you even, one of my favorite things, we do like a Good Friday to Easter move. Like you,
Hmm.
in your microchurch, I remember you sending pictures of you all doing the Stations of the Cross, like
Hmm.
by candlelight together in a home, which I think was
Hmm.
like really beautiful. And so there is a lot of that across us. I think that it is grounding. It is it roots us. But no, I mean, I think to to be the whole reason we started this network and the whole thing that we're trying to do is to like lean into mission, allow ourselves to be rooted in locality, run by everyday normal people with their own struggles and pain points,
Hmm.
to not to basically get rid of the sacred secular divide. That there's that I can go to, to these ornate moments that are disconnected from my actual reality. And so I think what can be really cool for us and a movement like ours is I actually think it really helps us embody the ethos we claim to care about. That for me to stop for 4 weeks and just to sit with some of the realities of what's going on, not only globally, but a lot of it. I mean, I think there's ways for us to look at through the microscope and through the lens of my neighborhood, my place, my city, my community. Where are things not the way that they're supposed to be? Where am I filled with lament? Where does it feel hopeless that I want to cling to hope? Where is there an absence of peace? Where is there injustice? Where I so desperately long for peace to break into the world? Where is joy something that needs to be manifest because it's not as joyful, or there's so much pain going on, there's hardship. How do we experience love and Christ-like love in a world that often feels so wrought with hate? So yeah, I think if it's done right, and if we acknowledge the season, I actually think it gives us more of a pulse and a heart for what we experience all around us every single day.
Yeah, and I think the thing I would add to that is it feels important to me that our network finds a way to celebrate these, like a season like this, kind of like all the things you're sharing about the liturgical calendar. I think at times it can, I mean, living on mission can feel so lonely. I think that's a lot of why those of us that have decided to be a part of Renaissance. It's like, sure, like in terms of like resources, you could probably like do your microchurch on your own. Like
Yep.
it's not like it like demands a ton of
Yep.
resources from the network in terms of like financial support or anything like that, right? But I think a lot of why those of us that have decided like we want to be connected to Renaissance regarding our communities, it's to just be reminded like, oh, like we're not the only ones that are trying to do this, and especially in a region like New England. And then I think we always talk about the tension of how do we be really local and at the same time know that we are connected to the global church, and what is our role in the global church. And I think sometimes we think about that in like service and what we can offer, and I think like there's something to like being like we talk about this all the time with mutuality, right? Being a recipient of the gifts of the local of the global church, and I think Advent is such a gift of the global church. Like these types of practices and the liturgical season is so important to remind ourselves like we're not just like spinning this up and being like, oh, like this feels nice to like lament and hold it in tension with hope. Like let's come up with a series, like it's like we get to follow this tradition of thousands of Christians that have wrestled with this and have tried to live this out with their neighbors and to love their friends in a way that doesn't make light of the hurt and still holds on to Jesus. And I think there's something really important, like for any group of Christians to be reminded, like you're not the only ones. And I think that relieves pressure, right? Of like, with this, like again, God is at work in the world. There's no pressure for us to save anybody. Like we don't have to like manifest anything. Like we just get to participate in what we've been invited into. And I think Advent is such a huge invitation from the long history and witness of the church, like capital C, the like we are following in the footsteps of like spiritual giants that have really worked hard at this. And I think that for me is really encouraging. And I think again, when it comes to embodied spirituality, we need those kinds of things. We need to be reminded, like I'm not like out here like gangbusters by myself and the hero of the story, like
Yeah.
me and my
Yeah.
microchurch, or like us in our network even. Like I think it's like there's so many other believers that are yearning for God to bring peace, hope, joy, and love, and we get to join them. And I think that feels really important to me.
But to piggyback on that really quickly, I think it didn't even hit me until you were speaking, and then it just like the thought dawned on me that I think part of the other beautiful thing is that it's to do this, it's not personality driven. And I think through like I remember when I used to have to come up with sermon series at Christmas and stuff, and it was just like you always hear like ministers like complain like, oh, like how do you make Christmas and Easter new for people? Like it's just old hat, and and it's like now that I'm getting older and, I've changed some of my thoughts on things, it's like, maybe that's actually a good thing, that we don't need to like
Yeah.
try to one up ourselves and make this captivating in some, not that we want it to be stale, but that we're trying to like outdo ourselves in our personality and the consumeristic means that we can generate, but that we stop and we participate in something that's bigger than us, that is transcendent, that is communal, that is rich in history. It is a part of the Big C Church. Like maybe that's actually a good thing. And so, yeah, just as you were talking, sometimes even in a microchurch setting, it can be really easy to pivot back to what we've experienced and like, how can I like create something for my microchurch that feels really good or captivating? And I'm like, no, like it's really wonderful for us sometimes to just stop, not make it about any one of us, and participate in a story that is larger than just our own individual personalities.
Yeah. And I think encouragement to that, like we just, finished celebrating Advent together yesterday in my microchurch in New Hampshire, and we did a reflection on like how do we each feel God's love this past year, and then what is one thing we love about our microchurch. And so one person shared, and it really struck me, where they're like, I love that our microchurch is kind of chaotic, and there's like no smooth transitions, and it's just like there's always life happening. Like, like even when we were lighting the Advent candles, the kids were fighting over the candles, like, and we're like, please don't burn the house down. Don't throw things like while we're trying to like do this liturgy, whatever. And it's like, I love this person's reflection because they shared like, it reminds me that like God is in the everyday things of life. Like, we don't just experience him in these like special performative services where it's like every transition is smooth and everything is cleaned up and nice and shiny. And it's like, I'm not saying those things are wrong. It's just that like we forget that the way we do things also shapes our spirituality. It's not just the message, it's the means, right?
Yeah.
And so I think like, are there lots of things that are imperfect about our microchurch? Absolutely. But at the same time, I think like one thing it is forming in all of us that I think we all noticed together last night is like, it's just teaching us that like following Jesus is in the mess, the mundane, the chaos. There's no beautiful liturgy that is like not at risk of being hit by a kid throwing a toy, like, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and God is there in that.
Yeah. Well, I think that even, yes, gives you more reason to do something that is richer than, yes, what you can do in that moment. Because, yes, it will be chaos. There is no way it won't be. And as someone who's been in my fair share of microchurches, even the most beautiful moments that in my head, like, oh, this will be so powerful, something happens. So it's just life. I mean, you get 10 or 20 people plus kids around a table or in a living room, like something crazy is going to happen. The dog's going to bark, someone has to go to the restroom, someone hits someone, whatever it is. There's just always going to be something going on. So yeah, it's just really beautiful to ground yourself in something that doesn't have to feel so much like we have to hit this. It has to feel awesome,
Yes.
Or it's not meaningful, sort of thing. So,
And I think like as we're talking about Advent in the microchurch space, I think the thing I would add here is like, I also think this is with what you're saying. We don't have to feel a certain way, and I think something we've noticed. Another person in our microchurch reflected like one of the things that they have loved about our microchurch is seeing how we've all grown, and it's like I agreed with that person, but I was thinking about it later, and I was like, isn't it interesting? It's just like, I don't know. I don't have kids, but I think every parent probably, like, you don't notice your kid growing every day, but you notice the milestones, right? And I think for us, like, reflecting last night, it's like, oh yeah, we all, like, we are so different than we were 3 years ago, but it's not like we could pinpoint, okay, and then this series really did it for us. I think there's just something to that slow theology of every week, day in and day out, in the chaos, and believing God is at work and trying things, and it's a mess and we don't feel a certain way and we wish we did, and like, but over time we're like, wow, God has really done a work in us. That's pretty amazing.
Well, to ground this, what you're saying, In the Christmas story, actually, I was guest speaking on the Annunciation, which is when Gabriel appears to Mary and announces the virgin birth and obviously how God is going to use her. And she, it's just an amazing story. Mary obviously ends up consenting and saying, yes, I want to do this. This is really, there's just so much depth to that story. But I was at the very end of my message, I was piggybacking on Debbie Thomas's writing, who I know we both love.
Yeah.
And she talks about the very end of that section there in Luke chapter 1, 26 through 38. It ends with the angel departing her. And Debbie reflects on the fact, isn't it interesting that Gabriel doesn't say, hey, I'm going to hang around for the next 9 months or maybe the next 30 to 35 years because I'm guessing it's going to be hard and you could use a sidekick. She doesn't say this, but I thought to myself, if it was a Disney movie, that's totally what happened because there's always a cool sidekick in a Disney movie. But the angel departs, and so the glow of that moment disappears. Mary goes back to the actual reality, the pains of childbirth. In Luke 2, we see her offering up her and Joseph, a very humble offering in the temple for Jesus. They don't have a lot of money. It's clear by the time Jesus is 12, he's already surpassed her theologically, and she's not sure what to do with the fact that she's raising this. I mean, all the mundane, ordinary moments of life start to take place. And isn't it interesting, we get all excited about that moment and the mountaintop and the spiritual highs. And Debbie just talks about that Luke in Scripture is often inviting us into pondering and imagining what happens beyond that. And I think what you're getting at in spiritual, when Microchurch is done right, when we're living life in community, when we care for each other, and we keep showing up time and time again, we're embracing when Gabriel departed, when the angel departed moments in our lives. And like you're saying, those are harder to quantify. But I'm glad there are moments like what you're describing. We take inventory and we look back and say, the same way I look back at pictures of my girls 2 years ago, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's 2 years ago. They've grown so much. You stop and you're like, you know what? The consistency of doing this, of being faithful to the liturgy, of showing up together, God has done something, even though in the micro moments, I might not always see it. The macro, purview, the larger meta narrative, God has done something in my life.
Yeah, I think that's so good. Maybe we could just finish on getting practical, and let's talk about what practices would we encourage people, maybe individually, to try to make the most of the Advent season, and then we could talk about what that might look like in Microchurch a little bit more explicitly. But let's start with individually, at least what's been helpful for you spiritually, missionally.
I mean, the great thing is we have the internet now, so I mean, that my biggest encouragement, would just be if you don't know a lot about Advent, spend some time Googling it, reading it. There's lots of wonderful things out there. And then, we obviously have, not to plug our own resources, if you go to wearerenaissance.org/Advent, every year we try to curate a few things. This year, I think we have a Kate Bowler series that you could experience it, and she writes in a very accessible manner to help you daily kind of have some thoughts on Advent. We have some stuff from Sarah Cohen Johnson that's how to infuse some of this with your family. But I don't think you have to be, this is kind of the theme of the episode, through my spiritual director, I've been doing the Divine Hours from Phyllis Tickle, and very simple, but it follows the church calendar, and I really appreciate having some daily readings and prayers on the theme of Advent. But it could just be as simple as, again, Google, you having a wreath. Traditionally there's, a wreath with five candles. There's 4 candles on the outside. There's 3 purple, 1 pink, and 1 the Christ candle there at the middle that's white. And typically on those 4 Sundays of what we were talking about, the 4 Sundays leading up to Easter, you light a candle and kind of reflect on that theme, whether it be hope, peace, joy, love. That though you might be wondering, why is the 1 pink candle, that is the joy candle, which is kind of perfect because it is a disruptive theme in the Advent season, the same way that that the candle is a disruptive color, so it's really wonderful. And then you obviously light the last candle on the actual, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, historically. But I would just say it could be as easy as just buying that. You can buy it on Amazon, the candles, and whether it's your microchurch or whether it's your family or whether it's you personally, just like stopping and lighting those candles and spending a few moments on those themes. There's lots of Advent reading things. There's things that could just be some prompts to get you to think for 5 minutes in some silence. That might be revolutionary for you if that's all it is. And so something just I wouldn't say like, you don't need to nerd out on it. You don't need to there's a way that you can. That's my tendencies, but I think just being simple, just finding some very simple practices that you can engage in. It might just start weekly, but if you can get to daily, that would be great too, to help you experiment a little bit and experience something maybe you haven't before.
Yeah, it's really, really good.
What about you? Any extra ideas you'd throw at it? Some practices maybe you've been engaging in or your microchurch that you could think like, hey, do this?
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of like the main ones that I also practice personally, but I guess since when this is coming out, there's just a few days left till Christmas. I would just encourage people to try to make some time to notice maybe the things that are not right around them, whether it is in the news or in their family or with their friends or in their neighborhood. And I don't know, like maybe try to pray in a way that's not just for resolution. Like, or to yearn for resolution in a way that doesn't gloss over how awful whatever it is that you're noticing. I think I think those practices are great for next season where you can like take in all of it, and I hope people do that. But with just a few days left, if you're listening to this, I hope like maybe people can just slow down a little bit and just notice, hey, like maybe this thing is really wrong in the world, and we do long for God to make it right, and He will one day. But probably not right now. And how do you sit with that? And what does it look like to be a follower of Jesus that doesn't have all the answers? And I think there's something about that also forces you to reckon with your own humanity. And I think that's really wonderful to have to deal with in this season of like God choosing to come into our humanity. I think at times that we gloss over our own, right? And I think to me it's been really important in my own spirituality to wrestle with my own limitations in the story of what God is doing. And I think that is what stirs faith, is when I realize like, well, there's nothing I can do, no matter how much money I had, no matter how talented I am at whatever. Like, I cannot fix this for myself. I can't fix this for my neighbor as much as I want to. And that's why we need God to come through. And I think that there's something important of just like wrestling that down. And I think that's something all of us can do in the last couple of days leading up to Christmas. And I hope people take time to do it.
Well, one, that's really beautiful. And I would agree. I think if there's anything you can get, let's do that right before Christmas. Don't rush there. And to that theme, maybe we can kind of transition, but I'd love to kind of like wind us down reading just a really lovely little poem called A Blessing for Traveling in the Dark from Jan Richardson, that I think hits on exactly what you're describing. This is what she says. Go slow, if you can. Slower, more slowly still. Friendly, dark, or fearsome, this is no place to break your neck by rushing, by running, by crashing into what you cannot see. Then again, it is true. Different darks have different tasks. And if you have arrived here unaware, if you have come in peril or in pain, this might be no place you should dawdle. I do not know what these shadows ask of you, what they might hold. That means you good or ill. It is not for me to reckon whether you should linger or you should leave. But this is what I can ask for you. That in the darkness there be a blessing. That in the shadows there be a welcome. That in the night you be encompassed by the love that knows your name.
I think that's the perfect way to end. So thank you everybody for joining us. We are excited to keep podcasting in the new year and walking through the realities of following God in the everyday, ordinary things of life. So if you want to find out more about Renaissance as a network, whether it's our microchurches or future cohorts, you can join us by heading to wearerenaissance.org. Merry Christmas. Bye.
Merry Christmas.